to the inaugural meeting, the very first meeting of the Economic Growth Board. People will realise this is here to build on the strengths of the previous said board and to give the absolute critical focus on the CA leading the economic recovery. And of course, it's probably very apt that we're having it on this day when we've just had, well, I'm sorry, I don't think it's out yet. We've had the first couple of pages of the levelling up white paper, but how apt it is that is probably going to be one of the main things going forward. We, like everybody else, are on tenterhooks waiting to see what the actual 300, 400 page document says. I'd like to thank everybody who's been extolling the virtues of Wolverhampton today. I see Corin was there. He was up really early. He was the 6:30 a.m. slot, weren't you, Corin? Yeah. But you look fantastic, mate. And I know Andy Street has been up and down speaking to various people. And obviously we all appreciate that. And of course, as you can imagine, being named, not named for one.
Just mute yourself. It's in the room now.
Okay, we'll get somebody in. We'll try and find somebody younger than Tim or myself to get this bit sorted out.
I don't know what's going on with the screen.
Can anyone hear though?
Yeah, I can still hear you, Ian.
That's all right. Hello, everybody. It's all right. Our screen's gone kaput as well, so somebody will sort that out as we speak. I wonder if Andy, the Mayor, or indeed board members would like to perhaps, you know, as we're talking about the white paper, give their reflections, initial reflections. Andy?
Sorry, yeah, I'll try, but like you, I am doing a bit of speed reading. I think there's probably just three things to say. The really important sentence in it for us is there will be a trailblazing devolution deal for the West Midlands, and we're in the company of Greater Manchester there. So what that clearly does is give us an opportunity to really set the pace here. And as the white paper says, other MCAs will probably follow that. And if I'm honest, some of the areas that I was hoping would be called out, for example, careers service, devolution of the national skills funding, for example, have not yet been passed over. But I did speak to Michael Gove yesterday, and he confirmed that all of those things were absolutely up for grabs in the third devolution deal. And he also said, and I pressed him on this, Corin will be interested in this, that the conversation we've had and the papers we've sent in around trade and investment, that would be another area that is definitely covered in that. So in a sense, Ian, we've only had the first act today. Yeah. What we get in that is really important. And as we discussed with leaders on Friday, we've got to organise ourselves to get the best out of that. The second thing is the bits that have definitely been confirmed so far for us specifically. And I think there's three things. Obviously, the fact that Wolverhampton will be one of only two places for a real intense focus on regeneration and was called out on Sunday is a really important win. And again, we've got to make the most of it and think how we organise ourselves. Secondarily, it's been confirmed that we will be one of 3 innovation accelerators. Now, this talks absolutely to the subject that we've had a lot of discussion about the fact that public R&D is not being focused here. It's a relatively small amount of cash at the beginning, but actually the mission piece around R&D is huge. It talks about a 40% increase in investment. And I know Mike and the Innovation Board will be thinking about exactly how we make the most of that. And then the third piece, which I think, again, really excited by as a specific for us, is this issue of the Smart City Region programme. Again, it's for us to make the most of, and this really picks up sort of building on the WM5G and the special purpose vehicle we set up there. And I think, again, it's something we've really got to shape. But those three are specifics to us, which are not offered to any other places or all other places. And then the third bit we should just call out right at the beginning, and I actually am not sure if Tom, Anita and Sarah have had a separate briefing on this. It does talk about the future of the LEPs. I'm pleased it does, because this has been going on far too long unresolved. And actually, I am pleased it says that there is a role, but it has to work in with the combined authority. And again, I think the spirit here is we must now work out exactly what that means as we go through our own review of economic governance. But it's very clear there's still got to be that piece with the private sector that the LEPs have brought to the table. So Ian, that's my sort of perhaps some of the highlights I've seen so far. But I'm sure there's lots of other stuff lost in the 400 pages that we haven't understood yet.
Well, I'm really glad you've managed to go through it. We have yet to have it delivered to us, but we'll sort that out. I wonder perhaps if I could call on Corin, you know, as certainly a business representative for some just initial thoughts, Corin, on it.
Ian, yeah. I mean, genuinely, we're excited about this. You know, I mean, it's easy to be cynical, isn't it, about, you know, whether the funds are new or what it looks like, anything else. The principles are right here, aren't they? And there's a real big commitment being made that actually, you know, funding will be available for local decision making, pulling powers away from Whitehall to areas where we know more about our areas and we can manage it better than anywhere else. And once those principles are done, I think it's really important. I was also really impressed actually with the ambition set out in the brief bits that I've read through, you know, and it does feel like the West Midlands plays front and centre in the way that this has been designed, doesn't it? You know, there's the education impact areas, there's the trailblazers, the innovation work. Yeah. These are all things that we know are important. The big deal for me, though, isn't it, is this will take a generation to fix. The West Midlands it doesn't done in a year. We need 10-year, 15-year funding grants that we can actually begin to work properly with. We've got to call an end on these 1-2 year assessments and 1-2 year funding streams. If we're going to do it properly, give us the cash, leave us alone, and give it for a decent amount of time so we can plan properly with it.
And certainly that's something I'll be interested in is the devolution piece. But you make some absolutely perfect comments. Anybody else before we move on? All I will say is that I-10 room, and I will call you in. Is that room 110? Turn your microphone off, please, because we're getting an echo. So we can turn your microphones off if you're not speaking, please. Thank you. Go on.
Yeah. Ian, if I may say, I mean, I think this is a great testament. I'm speaking obviously about the innovation that Andy referred to, a great testament to the work that a lot of people in the combined authority have done over many months with Bayes and others to recognise that we've got this imbalance on publicly funded research, but also recognising that we do have a framework and an ecosystem that can be leveraged, which we should recognise. But I think the second thing, and it may come up later in the agenda, is I see this as a great opportunity to help with our FDI, because getting international potential R&D investors in the region to recognise that we are up there as one of the three areas outside of the Golden Triangle. I don't think we should forget the significance of that, because I think it's a really powerful argument to help all of our efforts across the authority to attract FDI into the region. And to the earlier point, inevitably R&D and innovation is long running, and it's great that they're talking about 2030 rather than the next couple of years. And again, companies will welcome that because they'll see it as a strategic commitment rather than just a tactical program over a couple of years.
Absolutely, Mike. Couldn't agree more. Tom,
yeah, just very quickly, I think it's delightful that we've actually got rid of this uncertainty and worry about LEPs futures. I think the ability for the LEPs to contribute business input directly is very valuable. And
Yeah.
I really look forward to working with Andy and West Midlands Combined Authorities to make sure these relationships are honed out properly between us, really, so we can deliver, because it's a fantastic opportunity, and it's great that that uncertainty has been removed, because we're in real danger of losing some of the quality people, both from our boards and indeed from the staff, so this is a great step forward. That's all. Thank you.
No, you're absolutely right there, Tom. The good work that's gone on before shouldn't be lost, nor should that experience, expertise, etc. So I'm glad there's going to be a real role in the CA for the business community and the LEPs. So thank you very much, everybody, for that. And then just finally for myself about this board and where we go from here. I've spoke to Andy and others. We have got to do things right. It can't. We're not having a talking shop. Of course, we've got to talk, but we want to see actions emanate from our discussions, whether that's on the economy, jobs, and we'll get to see a lot of different areas that have certain relation to the economic growth board. But let's all be absolutely candid, honest, what we can do, perhaps even what we can't do, and let's see if we can move some of those vital economic targets as quickly as humanly possible. Cheers, thank you. Apologies for absence, anybody? Wendy, have you got the list?
Yes, Chair, just have a few apologies today. So we have apologies from Councillor Duggins, Matt Hammond, but we have got a substitute, Rob Valentine, and we have apologies from Councillor Court, but we've got Councillor Karen Grinsell substituting.
Cheers. I've seen Karen. I've seen Karen before. Welcome and welcome, Rob. Has somebody got the hand up? Ian Ward.
Yeah, thanks, Ian. Just apologies, I have to duck out at 1 o'clock.
Okay, mate. No problem at all. And of course, if that's the case, we may go in chorus, so we'll try and get as much of the upfront work. This is an inaugural meeting. It's a setting up meeting. It's getting positions and processes in play. So thanks for everyone for their attendance today. Right. So any declarations of interest by anybody that needs to be noted? Can't see any hands. So thank you very much. We'll move on. Item 4, the nomination of vice chair. I hope we can all unanimously agree that Tom Wesley, who we all know and love. Hello, Tom. I can't see your picture. Can take the role of.
Sorry, Ian. I turned my camera off.
Yeah. Well, don't do it when we're just about to nominate you, Tom. Is that agreed, everybody? I can see plenty of thumbs, head shakes, and everything. Nobody's against. No, of course they're not. Cheers, Tom. Thank you very much. I really look forward to working with you as we move forward.
Thank you, Ian.
Cheers, Tom. Right, then we have the terms of reference. We need to approve the terms of reference. Who's going to take us? Who's going to give us an oversight of the terms of reference? Is it Julie?
Hi there, Councillor Butfield. I can.
Oh, hello, Jonathan. I didn't know you were on. Yes, please, Jonathan. You could do us all a favour and turn the microphone on.
Okay, this is just to seek the board's formal agreement to its terms of reference. The terms of reference were as shared to the Combined Authority Board in November. There's further detail about some of the support groups that will be reporting to this board, particularly Create Central and the Innovation Board and the Energy Capital Board. So those will be incorporated into the work programme, but the recommendation is that the board agrees its terms of reference.
Okay. Thanks. I think we all understand that what we're doing is agreeing these terms as they are now, but understanding that potentially we may have to expand them once certain other papers or subgroups need to come on board. So that being the case, is everyone happy with what we've got now? Is that agreed? Thank you very much. Appreciate it. And then we're going to move swiftly on to the work programme. Who's Who's that?
Yep, Councillor Brookfield. So on the work programme, this has been provided as an indicative programme to the board, largely because many of the aspects that have been incorporated are subject to clarification through the white paper. So there is an indicative work programme attached, but there is also a suggestion that a senior officer group is established, drawing together partners from across the combined authority membership to be able to further refine that work programme. So the recommendation is that the board agrees the indicative work programme at the moment, but that's subject to further detail to be worked through that senior officer group.
Thanks, Jonathan. Any questions or comments for Jonathan? I mean, the issue is exactly that. It's an indicative work programme. I'm going to bring Karen in. Karen?
Thanks, Chair. Just a quick question, really. Obviously, it's a new board, and looking at the timescales, there was nothing in there about Commonwealth Games and the jobs associated with that. Obviously, that's just round the corner. I know that there's jobs plan is later in the agenda, but just wondered why there was nothing around that really in the work plan, and if it's, you know, intended somewhere later on.
So, as you said, Karen, we have covered that in the jobs plan later, but it may well be a topic that we expand on in more detail at future meetings.
Yeah, I mean, we get absolutely as we go through. At the moment, it's high level jobs plan. It's the various targeted jobs we want to certainly create in the West Midlands. Obviously, as we go forward, we will no doubt look at individual areas and sectors and opportunities that are there. So no problem with that at all, Cam.
Yeah, it's just a massive opportunity we've got just round the corner. So yeah, just building on that, really.
Yeah, no problem at all. Any further? Anybody else? So if not, can we agree those proposals as an indicative jobs plan and to set up that subgroup so that can be more defined? Let's put it that way. Is that agreed? Thank you very much. Cheers, Andy. That thumb is coming in handy. Thank you. And on to 7, economic conditions and forecasts. And I believe we've got Rebecca in, and we've got it in before time as well. Rebecca.
Thank you, everybody. I mean, I've sort of presented a lot of what's happened over the last couple of years to various groups and various of you. So I'll skip over and keep to the highlights, really. But just to note in terms of this, it focuses a lot on the economic forecasts. And what we do know is that the region was doing really well pre-pandemic and pre the impact of Brexit and especially on the exports imports. So we were in a very good position. We went into the pandemic in that what we did was we commissioned Oxford Economics, and that was a collaboration between the West Midlands Authority, Midlands Engine and Midlands Connect. So we actually have a model that fits the whole of the Midlands, and we can do analysis across the whole piece so that we can look at supply chains, etc. And it goes down to local authority level. So effectively the slides that you see in your pack, we can filter down lower. But what's important to note with that forecast is that it is a do nothing scenario. And what that tells, if the public sector does not intervene, that the economic conditions will worsen, and the gap will continue to widen. So in terms of the whole concept of market failures and intervention by government, we're in a position that to alter that forecast, we really have to do some of the things. And as we've just noticed, some of the announcements in the Levelling Up paper really do play to some of these issues that are raised. What I would say with the do nothing scenario is that the forecast implies that there are issues under that that are driving that forecast. And those assumptions are based on the global shocks to supply chains, which disproportionately affect the Midlands because of our sectoral makeup, especially the automotive industry and manufacturing. It also points to nationally migration reducing because of the pandemic and Brexit. And that again affects the region disproportionately because we were very good at attracting talent, and also reduced government investment. So they have assumed, bear in mind this forecast was done last summer, that government investment would have to reduce to pay for the pandemic. So as we've just discussed, we don't really know yet what the total budgets will come out of the levelling up, but none of that is taken account of in this forecast. So anyway, the forecast in general reflects these main issues, and point 2.3 draws out the main points, but effectively the UK is disproportionately affected by the global pandemic, and in turn the West Midlands is affected because of actually the strengths that we had before have now become problems and potential weaknesses, such as the growth in manufacturing and the supply chains there, our import-export capability, the growth in construction, especially in our city centres, which stalled through the pandemic, and again is reliant on public sector investment. And also, what's also interesting about this forecast, which I don't think many people have done before, is we've also got an emissions forecast alongside it. So what you can see is the effect of manufacturing declining in the main forecast means that there's a decline in the emissions in that sector, but household emissions continue to grow, which causes problems for our targets around that. But that picture's the same everywhere. So in terms of the key data that's come through this as well, and what we know from the data that we're gathering from our representative organisations and that we've done all through the pandemic, there are alternative forecasts. What I would say about the KPMG one that was in the paper, as highlighted before, they've included the Commonwealth game impact. That hasn't necessarily been included in the KPM in the OE one, so that's something that we would need to look at. What we can see is the cost of living issues accelerating, which could impact that forecast further. So that could be a negative side, whereas the Commonwealth Games would be a positive. And there are significant workforce issues. So the sickness is running high. How much of that is COVID related? We can't pick in the data, but ONS are releasing very high numbers around long COVID, which is affecting the population. Older people are leaving the workforce, which is reducing the available skills. There's that lack of migrant workforce and high levels of unfilled vacancies. So all of the other issues are affecting that vacancy issue. Workers are returning to their workplace, but nearly 1 in 10 businesses are not expecting them to return at all, and this disproportionately affects services. The trade deficit is widening in the region, which is again because of our trade links. The latest Purchasing Managers Index is still positive, but only just for current activity, and future business activity still remains very positive. So we do have a good base in the business thinking things are going to get better. Youth claimants and overall claimants have also declined, but they're still higher than when they were when we went into the pandemic. So the signs of recovery, things seem to be getting a bit better, but we're sort of bumping along. And the other thing to note in the forecast is it was on the assumption that there wouldn't be any new waves of the virus, and of course we've had the Omicron wave since that. Just in terms of the business insight as well that's highlighted, we've got significant problems with shipping costs. We've still got high cancellation rates in hospitality and reduced footfall. We've still got the issues around data adequacy so that we can work across Europe. And the business and the energy issue that we see in the household costs is also a big problem with business. And in the West Midlands, because we have a higher proportion of high intensity energy industries, that those costs affect us more than in other regions. And we also have the issue that we don't have sort of the assets that other regions have and around renewables because we're landlocked, etc. And just to come back to some of the levelling up thing, I have had a quick flick through what's been released so far in terms of the levelling up, and obviously I'm interested in the monitoring and the indicators. What I would say is it looks like most of the indicators that are going to be used in the levelling up, we already use in the state of the region. We potentially have a slightly different priority, so that will need to be reviewed. The only one that is a gap, and has always been a gap, and we've raised it as a gap, is the issue around pride in place. So I'm quite glad that government is planning to replace that set of indicators, so we get a good feel for what businesses and individuals think about where they live, and what it means to them. And that's my summary. Thanks.
No, thanks very much, Rebecca. And if I may just say, actually, one of the, there was a few good things that come out of the pandemic, and certainly the quality and breadth of the information coming from the CA and WM Ready has been one of the pluses, has been one of the benefits. And we say that because we will be using that information as guidelines and targets for ourselves. So that's why it's absolutely important. If I can just be, just to dive into it, just a tiny question before you go. You'll know our city and perhaps other urban areas in the West Midlands are having problems with youth claimants. Wolverhampton is the highest 18 to 24-year-old in the country. But just to say, and you'll explain why it's ragged green. It's given the green rating on the RAG system. Is there any way, perhaps going forward, because that masks, does it not? That masks problems, predominantly in inner city, built-up areas. Perhaps some of the reasons why the levelling up has been targeted. So perhaps if we could, perhaps just pick into one of these two little areas, and then that'll help us with our targets, our guidelines, etc. What do you think about that, Rebecca?
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, at the moment, in terms of the RAG rating, we do it based on past performance and moving through. One of the things we have looked at before is whether on some of these indicators you've sort of got a minimum or a target that you want to address, and you're up or you're below or above that, and that we could alter the RAG rating against that. I mean, it might be that your target is to get to the levels that we were pre-pandemic, in which case the RAG rating this month would be red or orange, because it's back on the way to that, but it's not there.
Okay, cheers, Rab. Thank you, Tom. Go on, mate. Turn your microphone.
I'm trying. Just a quick comment on the where the intelligence is coming from, because the economic impact group's been extremely helpful in the regional business council zone, but it does tend to be dominated by large corporates, and I think this is an area with the growth hubs that we've got, in our respective LEPs and so on, and the intelligence we get back through BAS. We want to make absolutely sure the problems and what these guys have got to say is properly incorporated into what we do. So that's just a comment from me, really, just try and get our arms around that.
Just as a response to that, Tom, alongside the EIG, we do have sort of a bi-weekly, or we've gone to the monthly now, meeting of the growth hubs and representative bodies to do that. So some of this also comes from there, and of course it features in the monitor every week, which is a summary from them, so at the back of the monitor.
Thanks.
Cheers, thanks. I thought I saw a hand. Andy Street.
Yes, Ian, thank you very much. Just to make a point that I think is probably blindingly obvious, but probably is needs just refreshing. And this is going back to what Rebecca said about export performance and linking it to the levelling up comments this morning. I mean, the truth is that our export performance was an incredible source of success pre-pandemic. And just one stat that others might not be aware of, just to really ram this point home, it was 24% of our GDP came from export of goods. In London, that figure, and it's a 2018 figure, it was 8%. So the difference between our economy and the Southeast is so clear in that. So just as Rebecca said, the decline in the UK's export performance has hit us disproportionately badly. Yeah. And I do think, Ian, in terms of the work plan for this group, and also the thought about what we negotiate in our devolution deal, some intensive cultivation of our exporting capability is absolutely critical. And I know Corinne has talked about this on many of the EIGs, but the reason I call it out is I sense we now have an opportunity with DIT to do this in a way in which we've hitherto failed. And it's been, frankly, pretty impermeable. But I think we've really got to make sure we land in that deal some real practical support for us in this area, because it is hurting us disproportionately.
No, excellent point, Andy. And of course, this paper today may be the catalyst for those different government organisations to realise what they now have to do is to break down those barriers. So good point, and one we'll certainly take up. Julie, did you have your hand up, or were you waiting sure?
I can cover it in the next item, Ian, don't worry.
Okay, thank you. Matt, I can see Matt's hands.
Yeah, thank you. And I just wanted to follow up on a point that Andy was raised there, and maybe as implicit through a number of the earlier parts of today's meeting as well, which is the need to join up various different things that are going on in various different forums, boards, etc. around the region, and in particular the report that Andy commissioned from EY, which I thought had some excellent insights about the economic challenges as well as the economic opportunities. I wonder, Andy, whether that is also something that should be shared with this board. I'm conscious there may be restrictions on where it can be shared, etc. But it should really point the way for aspects of the work of this board as well.
Cheers, Matt. I think I can answer that one. It's the next agenda item. So we're happy to share everything with this board. Let's be as clear as that. There's no holds barred. We'll share information and we'll work together. So cheers, Matt. Ian Ward.
Thanks, Ian. I think it follows on nicely from what you just said, actually. This new regional business council that's been set up, I think it'd be interesting to know how the intelligence that's garnered there will be shared with the rest of us, so that we can be aware of where there might be plans for future expansion, and indeed the converse of that, where we might be facing unemployment risks in the future. We could possibly then avoid any duplication of effort, and indeed actually getting mixed messages going out.
Fair comment, Andy. Do you want to come back on that one?
Yeah, with pleasure. I think there's two things in what Ian's just said. First of all, there definitely has to be a debrief from what the Regional Business Council, which is informal advisory, to be clear, is saying in terms of, let's call it, policy stuff. So that's absolutely right. And we need to think about how we do that into this democratic oversight board. But the other point that Ian makes is actually right to this account management piece. There should be no surprises from our big businesses. And there's one in Birmingham that's just given us a big surprise, for example, and that's wrong. And this goes back to the business support paper that we agreed that said that the growth company would take the lead in the account management for X big businesses, probably about 100. And then the LEPS growth hubs would provide that service at smaller business level. We haven't really got that set up yet, but I am absolutely in agreement with Ian. We need to get that done, because we should be really inside their boardroom brains, understanding what the issues are. So I think Ian B, I think the growth company has got the mandate to do exactly that from that business support paper.
Cheers, thank you. Is that okay, Ian? Yeah, happy?
Yeah. That sounds fine, as long as the growth company are then disseminating that information so that we're all on the same page.
Yeah.
Speaking of devil, Matt.
Yeah. Just well, thanks for calling me the devil. But yeah, look, I think to Andy's point, we just need to formalise that. You know, there are so many different channels of communication on a variety of these different topics. I think across both the business council and there are other business groups already in different parts of the region that meet pretty frequently to talk on matters of collective investment or collective areas of interest. And likewise, the work of the growth company. If we formally record that we need those updates, then I think between myself and a growth committee perspective, and certainly Andy and I from a business council perspective, we could provide those regular updates and insights into this group. It should be seamless, but we know that doesn't just happen and needs work.
Yeah, everyone makes a good point, and you know, we've got to do it. We've got to break down those barriers. We've got to share that information because we're all here for the collective good. And you know, we understand there's different messages, different priorities, but there is a way through this. Let's put it like that.
Paula. And then
Who's that? Who's next?
Paula.
Paula? Is that right?
Yeah, that's me. Thank you, Councillor Brookfield. Through the comments made around the business support review, it does appear as something to come back through this board, through the work programme. So we will obviously update in more detail on that. But just to really stress the point, there's been a real Team West Midlands effort on getting to where we are on the business support review, and I would, you know, strongly want all the board to sort of hear on behalf of all the partners, the combined authority, the local authorities, LEPS, Growth Hub, the Growth Company, Chambers. We are actively trying to make a concerted effort that all the wiring is hidden, whether you're one of the 100 or the rest that aren't the 100. We are genuinely, and you'll hear a little bit more about this at EIG, really trying to put in place something that puts the customer first. So, you know, and I think, you know, the point that Andy's made about the differentiation between the 100 and the rest, we have got really good dialogue between ourselves and the Growth Company to make that a really, really sort of strong reality. I know Matt and Neil are on the call, as are other colleagues, but you know, we've really tried to invest heavily in customer first services on this. So I just want to get that out there because I know we won't be back in this board for some time on the technical sort of aspect. So just a soundbite to leave you with.
Thanks, Paula. And Sarah Windham.
Thank you. Yeah, I thought Paula might say what I was going to say, but it's along similar lines.
Yeah.
Really just emphasising the importance of the supply chain to those top 100 and that link up. It sounds like this board could be a really important place for that, for bringing all that together. But obviously that, I know from my own experience in Coventry and Warwickshire, those big name companies rely on a strong local supply chain, and that's really key, and where you said the LEPs and the growth hubs are crucial. So just wanted to emphasise that.
Okay, cheers. Listen, if there's none further, thank you very much for those contributions. I can't actually remember what page we were on now, but we're 7, so we're going to agree the recommendations anyway. So everyone happy as that is a way forward. Cheers, thank you. And then swiftly on to item 8. I really wanted to try and get through these before we lose 1 or 2 people before we go in chorus. And this is the West Midlands plan for growth. And if I can, before we call in Peter and Sarah from EY to talk, to give us a bit of an update presentation. Just talk about the work and the rationale behind this. This is an absolute, genuine attempt to get, let's put it as simply as this, to get the biggest bang for our buck as quickly as possible. We know the indicators we're going the wrong way, and we can't have that. We can't have that. So it's quite right, with the limited amount of resources that are there, and hopefully there'll be more as we come forward. We took an honest look at various sectors across the West Midlands, many successful, is how can we get even more out of them. So what you'll see in the presentation is how that was brought out. And like I say, there's the work behind it, and Andy and Tim Powell and many officers and myself were included. So it's a genuine attempt. Is it all things to all people? Of course, it can never be. And, but the business as usual for the 85% of the rest of the West Midlands, the rest of the business may look at this and go, what about us? And you know what? They're not wrong, but we will continue that work and our way forward is to work with them as well. But this was a genuine attempt to get, you know, as much in as possible, because we can't have tens and tens of thousands of people unemployed in our area. It brings too many other problems. So I hope people take it as that. And now I'm going to ask Sarah and Peter if they wouldn't mind taking us through what they've got. Over to you guys.
Thank you very much, Councillor Brookfield. As highlighted by WM Reddy and Becky in her earlier presentation, after a period of the fastest growing region outside of London, the West Midlands now faces significant economic impact that, without further intervention, may lead to below average growth over the next decade, with a real negative impact on employment and earnings. The primary focus for our plan for growth work was therefore to define a framework through which the region could activate and amplify job creation above those forecast levels. This meant identifying areas where the West Midlands has competitive or comparative advantage and where there's evidence of market confidence in order to develop a credible path for positive, sustainable growth. Sustainable growth builds upon our region's strong heritage and champions an inclusive economy to deliver greener growth. It protects, it evolves, and it creates opportunity. To deliver this, the Plan for Growth framework as presented takes a cluster-based approach. It proposes two strands. Firstly, capitalising on primary clusters, clusters of scale and strength for additional growth in the short to medium term, and concurrently supporting nascent clusters and emerging technologies to drive the next horizons of growth. 8 primary clusters were identified, which through a series of targeted complementary interventions could deliver significant growth for the region to be around the UK average by 2030. So working with the Combined Authority and its partners, including the Growth Company and the LEPs as already acknowledged, a portfolio of potential nascent clusters were also identified. To be the fastest growing region outside of London, these emerging opportunities would need to deliver an extra 0.75 to 1 billion of GVA. So we're now going to talk you through our approach to identifying those key growth opportunities and also the initiatives upon which these opportunities should be able to be realised to deliver upon the regional plan for growth. Over to Peter.
Thank you very much, Sarah. So I think this slide is really helpful because it arcs back to what Rebecca was talking about earlier. But what we first wanted to do was define what we saw as the challenge. So very conscious this is quite a busy slide, but you've got 4 lines here that path out growth trajectories. So the yellow line is the current West Midlands forecast from now 2022 through to 2030. The grey line is what GVA would look like in the West Midlands if it matched the UK average. The blue line as if it was matching the fastest UK region outside of London, which the West Midlands was in the preceding decade. And finally, the green line is the growth trajectory of London, which is the fastest growing region in the UK economy. And what this highlights is that there's a growth gap. So a 3.9 billion growth gap by 2030 would need to be overcome to make the West Midlands as the fastest growing region outside of London. Now, we want to match London's growth trajectory. That would require an extra 6.7 billion of GVA. So that is, if you like, the challenge we were looking to address. And how did we approach it? Well, so as Sarah alluded to, we thought of this in 2 elements. So firstly, to get the region up to the UK average, and in fact, just a little bit ahead of UK average, the focus was on looking at existing clusters, what we call primary clusters, where the region had comparative advantage, and thinking through the sort of specific interventions that could be put in place to drive economic growth, as Councillor Brookfield said, now in the next 2 to 5 years, so to get that moving quickly. And through the combination of our analysis, we felt that you could achieve around 2 billion of that directly by direct intervention in those primary clusters, and that would have a wider benefit of additional billion via supply chain and wider multiplier effects. And that would give you around 3 billion of additional growth between 40 to 44,000 jobs and get you above that UK average. And then to go on to target to be best performing region, we propose a slightly different strategy. So here really thinking around new emerging sectors, which will deliver the growth of the future, perhaps over a longer time frame, and with the acceptance that you need to back a few more horses, a few more areas to seed some new sectors to deliver growth in the longer period. And as Sarah mentioned, we divided that target into 2. So to get you to being the best performing region outside of London, you need an additional 750 to 1 billion of GVA. But to match London, we're looking at another 3 billion of GVA. So if I focus then on how we determine the primary clusters, we really look to understand the comparative advantage of the West Midlands. So just explaining on this diagram, the x-axis, so the horizontal axis looks at the regional strength, so the kind of comparative advantages currently existing in the region. The x-axis looks at what we consider to be growth potential, taken on an external view of the market, where we saw their growth opportunities. The size of the bubble was the size of the sector currently expressed in GVA terms in the region. And then the colour of the bubble really reflects the kind of the contribution, so the value add of the sector, so the relative wages compared. And you can see that we identified 8 sectors where we thought there was an opportunity to sort of double down investment and accelerate growth. And those range from the traditional strengths in manufacturing of automotive and that transition to electric vehicles, in logistics and distribution, perhaps taking advantage of the shift to the online economy and some of the challenges that Brexit will bring around global trade. Professional and financial services, already a large sector and a highly value add sector. And then perhaps some of the sort of more nascent sectors even now. So creative content production and gaming, still relatively small, but we think it has a high opportunity to grow. So that was how we defined our primary clusters. And then thinking around the strategy we're adopting in terms of accelerating growth in those two views, so one on primary and one around nascent. So with primary, it's very much understanding existing regional strengths where there's already a strong jobs base and a strong industrial base, and then really thinking through the barriers and the enablers for growth, so what they may be, and that would inform our focus on developing a set of interventions to unlock and accelerate that growth. And then, as I mentioned previously, when we're talking about targeting that best performing region, a focus on nascent clusters. And here, really, we undertook a review of emerging technologies where there's some existing capability in the region, but perhaps just at the very early stages, or some trends that we think the region could take advantage of. So bringing about how we can target those, placing some long-term investments across a number of different areas, with recognition that not all of those will pay back, but with the intention of driving faster growth in the longer term. And again, then thinking about what are the barriers, what are the kind of enablers you need to really seed those? How do you go from startup to scale up? How do you seed new clusters and new areas? And recognizing the importance of R&D, which is, again, something we discussed earlier on the call, but also something that I note in the release around the white paper has been flagged as a key focus area for the levelling up agenda. So I think I was going to hand back over to Sarah to just go into a little bit more detail around the clusters themselves, the interventions, and how we bring it all together.
Thank you, Peter. So what were the clusters? This slide summarises the key features of the clusters, their role within the plan for growth, and the nature of the interventions that we believe are required to really unlock their potential. We believe that both sets of clusters demonstrate paths for credible growth, but in very different ways. So we're going to talk you through first the primary clusters and the interventions that underpin them. To identify the optimal interventions, we drew upon domestic and international experience to develop a drivers for growth framework. We sought to find interventions that accelerated and amplified the conditions for growth, giving consideration to infrastructure and physical capital, the human capital, the social capital, and the investment or the institutional capital. This meant finding interventions which leveraged existing competitive advantage to accelerate opportunities and accelerate activities through the enablers and removing barriers. Our regional analysis and our experience of the WMCA and their partners allowed us to conclude that really there are some common needs and barriers across clusters. This means that some interventions are likely to have a compounding positive impact if they're implemented effectively and could be structured across a number of clusters rather than mapping one for one. The interventions that we identified are broadly four categories: those which drive outcomes through the public policy framework, through organisational coordination levers, or those associated with funding and financing. The next slide sets out those potential interventions which address the barriers to growth across multiple clusters. I think it's timely to recognise that in preparing our work, we recognise that these initiatives and clusters don't represent the whole economy, and neither were they intended to, with the objective that we sought to achieve, and that due to the diversity of our region, not all communities will benefit at the same time in the same way from these initiatives. However, they have been created in line with the intent to positively impact the whole region. They promote alignment amongst partners and across the supply chain to better meet businesses' needs. They support new delivery models, which provide scalable investment opportunities and evergreen financing solutions. We believe that if delivered effectively, they'll create the size, pipeline and commitment required to optimise market opportunity across the West Midlands. So here's the numbers of what it might look like if these initiatives are all done together. We don't propose to talk through all of these in this summary today, but they are available in your pack. So if we look at the next slide, which is the nascent or emerging opportunities, these are the second strand of the Plan for Growth framework. They are inherently riskier than the primary clusters, and they're smaller in size, but we believe there's a real appetite and alignment with regional priorities, such as those providing support now might lead to significant growth in the future. The strategy here and the initiatives are more strategic in nature. They're intended to provide access to funding or financing to seed capital, in attracting and developing necessary skills through R&D and championing the clusters to help them mature. Again, we're not intending to talk through all of the detail of the numbers in this presentation, but what you can see is how they might actually support the two areas that Peter referred to, helping us get to the fastest growing UK region and then meeting London and the required additional jobs in terms of both GVA and in terms of growth. Which brings us to a point that Matt mentioned earlier and how we bring it all together. Yes, please. And it brings us towards the end of our summary, but by no means the end of the Plan for Growth journey. In fact, with the announcements this morning, it marks the start of a very exciting chapter, as many of the themes that you've seen in clusters align nicely to the intent and the levelling up white paper themes. It starts with a series of activities to integrate and activate the framework and join it up with other parts of the regional vision. And so in conclusion, we've identified a package of cluster-specific and cross-cutting interventions that are targeted at the existing or primary clusters that we believe would bring growth to the West Midlands to just ahead of the UK average by 2030, and a focus on emerging clusters through the provision of seed funding and early stage support, which we believe will help bridge the gap to become a faster growing region. The next steps are set out in this slide, and it leaves us only with a chance to thank everybody that's contributed towards this, the partnership across the combined authority and also the members within the organisation to identify areas where our region can accelerate and amplify positive sustainable growth. Thank you very much.
No, thank you both very much for that presentation. I said the end of a lot of hard work, and I just wonder if I may be allowed to ask Andy, and Andy led on this and put a lot of hard work into this. So the importance of this, Andy, and our commitment to it would be good.
Yeah, with pleasure, Ian. So first thing to say is I think this is a really good academic piece of work, and I don't mean to be in any way critical in using that word academic. It's very important that it's robust and people can scrutinise it and see if it stands up to scrutiny. But the obvious point is it doesn't actually itself create a single job. So actually what happens now is the critical piece of this. And in a sense, the timing of this first board is perfect, really, because what we've now got to do is think, how are we going to make those interventions happen, and how, with the resources that we've got in some other headings as well, whether they be in transport, in housing, wherever else, what local authorities are doing themselves, what LEPs are doing themselves, how we come together to deliver this. So it's actually the really tough bit is now in how we organise ourselves and follow through. And you know, this maybe people will say, well, it's my fault for this being the situation, so I will offer it up. I think, to be honest, in the past we've done good strategic work and we've been less good at the follow through and the implementation. So that's really the test to us now, Ian. But it's a brilliant sort of basic piece which says there are some really exciting opportunities for us to get behind here.
Cheers, Andy. Appreciate that. Corin?
Oh yeah, really good piece of work, and I absolutely believe in the exciting way that when clusters work well, the impact that can have on regional economies, which is good. Just a couple of observations, really. First one is the white paper timing's good, isn't it? Because it's so hard to get lower tiered supply chain businesses to invest in R&D and innovation to make the most of these cluster opportunities. So how we set up that innovation hub that's been announced today is a really important one. The second one is we don't want to create all of this wealth and all of this growth. If we want to maximise that in the local area, we need to make sure that local people are getting those jobs and local firms are getting those opportunities from procurement. The local authorities across the patch are doing some great work around community wealth building, and I wonder if it's worth us thinking about how we monitor the creation of jobs and procurement opportunities and contracts as a way of seeing if we're maximising the pound. We want to create the growth, but keep as much of that wealth local if we can.
Thanks, Colin. Mike?
Thanks, Ian. I think it was in the paper that Sarah and Peter took us through, but I just want to stress the importance of what I would call, intersector innovation. The models going forward aren't going to be based on traditional sectors, and I think we have a really, really important role to facilitate different sectors working with each other to generate the new businesses of the future, the new innovations of the future. And I just want to, I think it's in clusters, but I just wanted to check with Sarah and Peter that, that's recognised in the opportunity, because my sense is that, for example, in London, a lot of that work sort of almost intuitively goes on. And we want to make sure that we mirror that model and leverage all the sectors that we have in the region to work together to bring the new, the new businesses and the new ideas and the new employment to the region.
Thanks, Mike. What I'm going to do, I'm going to take Tom Wesley next, and then we'll go back to Sarah and Peter for one or two of them follow-ups. Tom?
Thank you, Ian. Yeah, I just wanted to point out there are a couple of things missing from the report in my head. The metals and materials forum and the sort of foundation industries have got a lot to offer still, and digitisation stuff actually brings the dimensions to them. The repowering of the Black Country, something we go on about, but actually that's just a pilot scheme which can be spread across the whole of the West Midlands when we get organised. So I think that's crucially important too. And also, of course, the brownfield work that's going on Wolverhampton. I mean, there are a number of areas which, and I don't know if this report is the finished product or whether we could rather regard it as an iterative process and build on it, because I think that would be good if we could.
Just one second. I'm just going to stop this urgently. Ian Ward, are you there? Are you still there? Because he's just about to leave us. Are you still there? Go. Oh. It's all right. I was going to take his vote. Do we now become in chorus because Ian's left? Is somebody speak to me? Anybody?
We're still quorate, Councillor Brookfield, okay, because I think we have representation from 5 of the constituent members.
Perfect. Sorry, my fault. Cheers for that, Tom.
No problem.
Lee, and before I go back, I've Lee Barron put his hand up. Lee, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Ian, Chair. I'm not sure if this actually falls in between both this paper and the next one, but there was a lot of talk, particularly around, leverage and whatnot, and using, the public purse basically to get the maximum amount that we can, and also as well spread good jobs in the process. And it reminds me of a paper that the TUC wrote for the West Midlands about coming out of the pandemic and what that should look like. And we reported in there that in 2019, the whole of the public sector in the West Midlands spent a combined £74 billion in public procurement in that year. It's quite an incredible amount of money that can be used. And what I wanted to look for and what I wanted to see was some kind of plan as to how we deliver the good jobs. We talk a lot about it, and rightly so, and I've been proud of this combined authority in the way it's had inclusive growth going through its very veins. And to create those new jobs, 100,000 new jobs, that's what we're talking about in the next paper. It's how we do that. It won't happen by accident. It's got to have some form of intervention and leadership. And I'm just looking to find ways as well as to how we can shape that, and how the TUC can get involved in shaping some of that, so that we can use that procurement leverage to make sure that we can get the jobs for the region that's going to deliver the growth and mean that people are going to turn around and recognise the West Midlands as not only the fastest growing regional economy in the country, but the best regional economy in the country at the same time.
No, cheers for that, Lee. You make some excellent points there, and it's the nub of what this paper's about, right? And it's exactly what Andy was saying. We've got this report. It's forensic. It's academic. Now, what are we going to do about it? To give exactly what Lee's saying, how are we going to make that into jobs? And yet, I'll be more than happy if you send me a copy of that TUC report. I'm sure other people will be as well, because that brings into another sector that many authorities, Birmingham and Wolverhampton, are looking at their procurement models exactly as we speak now. To keep more money locally, better jobs, more local jobs. So thanks for that. I'm going to bring Julie in now. Julie.
Thanks, Ian. And just to respond on a couple of the specific points that have been raised, I think exactly as you've just said, in Lee, this selection of some of these clusters has been predicated on where they will deliver good jobs, Lee. So looking at salaries in particular, because that's really important to us. So that's been fundamental to the work. I think also fair to say that and thanks to Sarah and Peter, but we've covered a hell of a lot of information in a really short slide pack. So Tom, some of your points are covered in the detail. And what I suggest is we can share the much bigger slide pack with you. We can come out and talk to you if that's helpful, or talk you through it. But actually what this does do, and it's very clear, it identifies those clusters with the potential for above average good growth with higher salaries. So that's why not everything will be in there. And as we've noted, some of those foundational sectors won't be included because they won't deliver that kind of good growth for us. That's not to say we abandon them, but this is deliberately targeting good high growth. So just important to note that and how we start to take those interventions forward. But lots of the detail we're happy to share with you. But I think I also wanted to be quite clear about the specifics of this piece of work as well.
Yeah, and just to pick up, sorry, I missed it, Lee. And I said, well, actually, what are we going to do about it? And we talk about that intervention. We're going to have to put our money where our mouth is. We're going to have to redirect resources. Andy says it might be in different portfolios to say this is a cross-cutting thing that will bring in potentially 100,000 good jobs, because we're looking at businesses that with extra push, extra investments, can deliver those good jobs and at scale. And so rest assured, and I said at the start, it's not a talking shop this, I'm not interested. If it's a talking shop, I'll leave. I suspect many of you two will do that as well. We are going to deliver on these. We are going to put our respective money where our mouth is. So I hope that people understand that. If there's no further, I will just very quickly go back to Sarah and Peter. Anything in there? Anything you've heard that you wish to come back on?
I think Julie has answered everything even better than we could. So really just to re-emphasise, we truly do recognise that the region doesn't operate in silos, and that there is a real evolution of organisations, both in their products, their services, and their own vision and their intent. And there's a real divergence of traditional sectors, which is why we chose to take the cluster approach, recognising that even defining clusters is equally hard, and why one of the activities that we've identified to really make this a reality is to understand and identify the interlock and interdependencies of those initiatives to really get the best value. And in terms of the comment around iterations, we see this as the start of the journey, as I mentioned in our close, that this is a dynamic document. It's something that has to evolve over time to react to the market conditions, the consumer behaviour, and also other supply and demand levers that might be available to you. So hopefully, as Julie concluded, we have considered everything that we could in coming up with the 2-track plan for growth.
Cheers. Listen, that's brilliant. Thank you very much for that. I'm going to and I did want Ian Ward to be here. Very important recommendations. It's how we take this forward, how we're physically going to put the work in, the effort in to take this and use this as our basis to get the outcomes we deliver. So the recommendations before you are everybody happy, comfortable? Are they agreed? Thumbs would be nice. There you go. Fantastic. Listen, thank you very much, everybody, for that. We go to our last major piece, which is the West Midlands job plan. Let me just get it myself. And Julie's going to introduce this. Julie, over to you.
Yeah, fine, Ian, and apologies. Just before we leave the last item, though, conscious that there was a lot packed in there. So in terms of the recommendations, if you're happy, and I think just worth drawing those out specifically. So there is one about establishing a small group drawn from officers, from the partners, exactly as others have said. This has been a partnership approach, but to start to work now on how do we actually take these recommendations forward. I think we heard a lot back from the work about how currently the region's not, we work well together, but it's not best been set up for success. There's been lots of approaches that have been fragmented. Interventions don't always work together. So as well as the officer group to look at how we start to prioritise some of those interventions, there's a second piece of work, which again is timely given finally the white paper is out. When we look at those different functions we might broadly call economic development and who does what across the region, I guess all of us would recognise that you wouldn't start there. It's a kind of more confused picture than it needs to be, more fragmented, areas of overlap. So whilst we've made, you know, a pretty good fist of it so far, we all recognise there's a huge opportunity to streamline, to align, to get things much more coherent. And through this new growth board, that's the opportunity for us to do so. I think the Levelling Up white paper will help. So we're also recommending a second group, more political, to start to look at that functional piece, that governance piece, and bring a bit more, perhaps, streamlining coherence to how we take this forward at an organisational, institutional level. So I did just want to give people an opportunity, if that's all right, Chair, to just ask any questions about that too.
Why don't you think I did a good job of doing that? Listen, I did say the recommendations were really important. It's going to enact this. I'm sure people will take us up on the offer of unpicking it more, discussing it with everyone. I want everyone to be involved and to put their ideas forward. There are a couple of work groups in there, and what you'll see, they're going to be looking at the nuts and bolts of how we start to deliver this. So we will work together, get some teams together who can put time, efforts, and commitments, and indeed even finances to get there. But I'm sure that offer is for anybody who wants to learn more, to participate more, to understand it more, to look at the full reports. Then that offer is there for everybody. Okay. Now, go on, Julie. Now you want to chair the rest of the meeting. Carry on.
Happy to move on.
Yes, please.
Just on the next bit then, as others have alluded to, very much part and parcel of the approach that we're taking, that good economic growth has got to secure good jobs for our residents, and if it doesn't, there's kind of no point in doing it. So we're very keen that we run the two items together and look at it. So we have got a West Midlands jobs plan, which sets out a broad target for 100,000 people into employment by 2023. I think important to note that that was established during the pandemic, and actually events have moved on in ways that haven't perhaps have changed the circumstances. So where at one point we were expecting huge unemployment, particularly amongst some of our most deprived communities, we're in a situation now where those groups, there are still issues, as you touched on earlier. Places like Wolverhampton youth unemployment, places like East Birmingham still have way too high in terms of claimant count and unemployment, but actually a labour market which has more vacancies than we've ever seen before. So the nature of the challenge has shifted, but I think it comes back to the point Lee made. This is still about making sure there are good jobs for our residents. So what we are really setting out in this paper is how we start to track that, making sure that we don't lose the detail of particular communities or particular areas in the bigger picture, which is broadly more positive, but also noting that as a devolved area, and hopefully today's announcements give us a little bit more funding to play with as well, we have the opportunity to put in place the right kind of training and skill solutions to make sure that our residents are equipped to get those jobs. So we are working across all of the Mets at the moment, working well, making sure that investment, whether that's HS2, Commonwealth Games, that we're linking that to local communities. But that offer is also on the table for we know we will need to do that much more systematically as part of Plan for Growth, but more wider. So making sure people are aware of that. And then I think, again, the point that Lee touched on, and something we've talked about previously as well, is trying to ensure that any public investment is linked to that job creation scheme. So using that public purse for that wealth creation as well, community wealth creation. So just wanted to touch on a couple of areas. I think we've done some good work across the region. We've got a couple of examples in the paper, things like HS2, some of the work on construction, on digital boot camps, etc., linking residents to good jobs. But actually, one of our challenges moving forward is that broader, how do we support people already in work? Because actually one of the challenges of the West Midlands is too many of our residents are in low paid, low skilled jobs, often in industries that have lower levels of productivity. And at any one time, usually about a third of people that are on universal credit that are seen on the claimant count are people in work. So we've got an in-work poverty issue, and that comes back to how do we as a region start to tackle that, which means training people in work, not just those out of work. And I think that's a huge challenge for us, but an opportunity linking it to the Plan for Growth that we touched on earlier. So I'll pause there for any questions, thoughts.
Any questions or comments for Julie? Obviously, this goes hand in glove. Lee, you put his hand up first, and then I'll take Karen after that. Lee.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Chair. It's just really just a couple of points, maybe just stretching out some of the points I made a minute ago, where I felt as though some of my questions sort of landed in between the documents, and it's around that issue on good jobs. You know, every devolved area that I know of is working on some kind of map to show people what good jobs look like. And people might think that sounds a little bit daft, but I've always said there's three kinds of employers. There's a bad employer, there's a good employer, and there's those that want to be a good employer. And I suppose what I'm asking is how do we show them what we believe good jobs are? What is it that we want? What is the if you like the floor that we want to set to turn around to people and say this is what it looks like? I'm not asking for another charter. I know we've probably got a charter for every day of the week, but what I am saying is when they come and say what is it that you want from us for us to procure your public expenditure, what are we after? What are we looking for? What's our minimum sort of standards in all of this? And I think that if we could map them out between us, employers, a worker's voice, politicians, to say this is what it looks like, not only can we then deliver that for ourselves, but we could turn around and use that as a marker for the rest of the public sector in the West Midlands, so we can start to combine that money in order to make sure that everybody is starting from the same place and the same base, so that we can genuinely spread and build good jobs.
Listen, thanks for that, Lee. I mean, that's something I'll certainly push forward with. Actually, many authorities now, even just on their own, let's use this term that people are using, social value. You know, we're all in charge of contracts, and we should be demanding more, and that's absolutely right. And you know what? It's legal as well. We've always got worried about it in the past. You know, it's always been best value. Well, actually, what it meant was the lowest cost. But now we want more out of those jobs, and you know, people, certainly the companies we're working with and businesses we're working, are only too happy to go that extra mile. So I'm more than happy to take that forward, to talk about it, but it's perhaps something that obviously needs to go across the West Midlands as a whole. And I see Andy nodding. Thank you. Karen?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I just wanted to touch on sort of what might be, are we looking at what might be the barriers into work? Because recently, I've been in meetings and other groups are looking at what the barriers are. So we talk about high level jobs, but of course, we do still need to get people into those lower jobs and just get them into work so that they then can sort of climb up that ladder. And for instance, you know, you talked about areas in Birmingham which touch North Solihull and that inclusive growth corridor that we're working on. You know, there are still people out there that can't read. There are mothers with children who can't go to work because they don't have the childcare. So there are the barriers that we really need to look at. And, you know, job applications, some of them are just basically too complicated. So with all of this work that's going on at a much higher level, sometimes we've got to get back to the basics and think about what are the barriers of people getting into work. And when you're talking about looking at those people in work, upskilling them into jobs, I guess we just have to be careful that we don't double count here, because there's somebody in a job, are we talking new jobs, and that we don't double count where somebody's already in work. So it's just how that data is then shared with us, I suppose.
Yeah, no, I absolutely understand that, and your issue about skills and basic are absolutely valid, and you know we suggest probably, you know, the subgroup may want to talk to somebody like the DWP, ask them in to come in for a talk about it, or people, or even, you know, the CA will have a lot on skills and the skills program going forward. Of course, it's hand in glove, isn't it? You know, what we're saying is we need a quick expanse of good quality jobs, 100,000 at these companies who perhaps have barriers, but they could be financial barriers, land barriers, whatever. What can we do to open that? But you're absolutely right. The overwhelming majority of people are not in them particular types of workplaces. So what more can we do, you know, to break down some of those barriers? So yeah, that's a good point and something we can take forward.
There's no one else.
Is there anybody else? Well, that's not too bad. That's not too bad. Listen, so can we just agree the recommendations, and we'll take all these notes down. We will contact people. If people want more information on anything, please ask. If you want to offer something, or you just need a little bit of extra time, you know, please get involved, and let's make this meeting, you know, a force for good. I think we can. I think people will be surprised that as we go along the line, various finances can be unlocked by us looking at it anew. So I'm really hopeful, and I think we've got good cross-political support for it, and that is important, because you know why? You don't get that in every authority. Mark my words, you don't. So we're pleased about that. Okay then, folks, that's the recommendations are carried. And finally, the date of the next meeting you've got on the 24th, 10 a.m. Obviously, as we get near the time, we will absolutely confirm that. But obviously, there'll also be some of these other subgroups meeting in between. So, listen, thank you very much, everybody. It really has been a really interesting day, and it'll probably get more interesting as we go through it. I wish you all the very best, and goodbye. Thank you. Bye-bye.